You cannot win this, my brother laughed as we walked into court. My father smiled, certain I was finished without a lawyer. I stood there alone and said nothing. Then the judge opened my file and froze. Their attorney turned completely pale. Seconds later, my brother stopped smiling, and my father nearly collapsed when the truth was finally revealed. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who completely underestimated your worth. My name is Nia. I am 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the designated embarrassment of my family. We were seated at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Buckhead, Atlanta. The kind of establishment where the lighting is dim, the chandeliers are real crystal, and the waiters speak in hushed tones. It was a Sunday family dinner, a tradition my father Elias enforced to project the image of a wealthy, united Black family. But there was nothing united about us. Across the table sat Harper, my brother Marcus, and his wife. Harper came from old Southern money, a fact she made sure to weave into every conversation. She wore her blonde hair perfectly styled and looked at me with the kind of practiced condescension that only generations of inherited wealth can teach. She picked up the heavy leather folder containing our dinner bill and tossed it across the pristine white tablecloth. It slid past the expensive wine glasses and stopped right in front of my plate. "You can get this one," Nia Harper said, her voice carrying that sugary sweetness that barely masked the venom underneath. "Consider it your contribution to the family. Since you do not bring any prestige to the table, paying the bill is the least you can do to make up for the embarrassment you cause us." I looked down at the receipt. The total was nearly $4,000. They had ordered the most expensive reserve wines, premium steaks, and endless appetizers. I had ordered a simple salad and a glass of water. Marcus leaned back in his chair and chuckled, adjusting his designer tie. He had spent his entire life trying to prove he belonged in Harper's world, constantly seeking validation from her family, while looking down on his own flesh and blood. "Come on, Nia," Marcus sneered. "You are single. You do not have a real mortgage or a country club membership to maintain. Pay the bill. Show my wife you are good for something other than embarrassing us in front of polite society." I sat perfectly still, listening to the clinking of silverware from the surrounding tables. I did not cry. I had shed my last tear for these people years ago. Instead, I shifted my gaze to the head of the table, looking at the man who was supposed to protect me. My father Elias took a slow sip of his bourbon. He was a real estate mogul who worshipped at the altar of status and appearances. He set his glass down and looked at me with pure disappointment. "Your brother is right," Elias said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I gave you every opportunity. I paid for your undergraduate degree. I got you into a top-tier law school so you could become a corporate attorney and bring actual value to my firm. And what did you do? You dropped out. You threw away a brilliant legal career to become a junk peddler." A junk peddler. That was what my father called my profession. When I left law school, I realized I did not want to spend my life buried in paperwork to defend greedy men like him. I wanted to be on the ground making real moves. So I went into corporate liquidation and asset recovery. When a business goes bankrupt, I step in, evaluate the assets, buy the debt, and liquidate the company. My family viewed it as glamorous pawnshop work, a dirty blue-collar job that shamed our wealthy Atlanta reputation. They thought I was driving a truck and hauling broken office chairs. They had absolutely no idea that I was the founder and CEO of Apex Holdings, one of the most ruthless and profitable asset recovery firms on the East Coast. Harper leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, enjoying the spectacle. "It is honestly tragic," she sighed, feigning pity. "Marcus tells me you are still living in that modest apartment downtown, hustling to sell scrapped office supplies. We try to include you in these dinners because Marcus is so forgiving, but you have to understand how difficult it is for us. We mingle with politicians and executives. Having a sister-in-law who peddles trash makes us look bad. The absolute least you can do is cover the dinner. Think of it as a tax for being the family failure." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. She was sitting there, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, relying on her generational wealth and my brother's desperate social climbing, lecturing me about hard work. And my own father and brother were nodding in agreement, united with a white woman in their shared contempt for my existence. They honestly believed they were untouchable. They believed I was just the poor, struggling dropout who should be grateful they even allowed me to breathe the same air in this luxury restaurant. I looked at the bill again. $4,000. To them, it was a fortune designed to crush me, to drain whatever meager savings they assumed I had. They wanted to see me panic. They wanted to watch me sweat, apologize, and beg for help so they could graciously offer to pay, while reminding me of my perpetual inferiority. I reached into my designer handbag, which Harper had previously dismissed as a cheap knockoff, and pulled out my wallet. I did not say a single word. I simply opened the leather flap and extracted a solid metal card. It was not a standard credit card. It was a heavy matte black Centurion card, the kind issued only by invitation to individuals with an astronomical net worth. I placed the heavy metal card squarely on top of the leather bill folder. The soft thud it made against the table caused Marcus to stop laughing. Harper glanced at the card, her eyes narrowing in confusion as she tried to process what she was seeing. Elias frowned, leaning forward to get a better look at the distinct insignia etched into the black metal. But I was not pulling out this card to pay for their extravagant meal. I was pulling it out to make a completely different kind of transaction, one that would mark the exact moment their perfectly curated world began to collapse around them. The heavy metal card landed with a dull thud against the leather check holder. For a fraction of a second, the only sound in the private dining room was the soft jazz playing through the overhead speakers. Marcus stared at the matte black surface, his arrogant smirk freezing in place. Harper blinked, her manicured fingers halting halfway to her wine glass. My father. Elias narrowed his eyes, his real estate developer instincts kicking in as he recognized the distinct weight and design of a card reserved exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. But Marcus was too blinded by his own ego to understand what was sitting right in front of him. He let out a harsh, barking laugh and shook his head. He actually thought it was a fake. He leaned across the table, ready to deliver another monologue about how pathetic I was for trying to play dress-up in his world. He never got the chance to speak. The heavy, hurried footsteps of the general manager interrupted him. David, a man who had worked at the Sterling for 15 years and catered to the city's most elite politicians and celebrities, approached our table with a swift, purposeful stride. Marcus immediately snapped his fingers, pointing at the black card. "Take this garbage away," David Marcus ordered, adopting his best imitation of a powerful man. "Run it so we can watch it decline and end this pathetic charade. My sister is having a delusional episode." David did not reach for the folder. He bypassed Marcus entirely. He did not even look at my father. Instead, David stopped directly beside my chair, smoothed the lapels of his immaculate suit jacket, and offered me a deep, respectful bow. "Oh, good evening, Ms. Nia," David said, his voice trembling with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. "We are incredibly honored to have you dining with us tonight. Is the temperature in the private room to your liking? Can I get you anything else?" Marcus choked on his breath. Harper stared at the manager as if the man had suddenly spoken a foreign language. My father lowered his fork, the rare steak completely forgotten on his pristine plate. I smiled warmly at David, ignoring my family's collective shock. "The room is perfect, David. Thank you for your prompt attention to detail. I wanted to come by and see the flagship location in person before our Monday morning press release goes live." Marcus slammed his hand onto the table, making the silverware rattle. "David, what on earth is going on here?" he demanded, his voice echoing loudly off the mahogany walls. "Why are you bowing to my sister? She cannot even afford the valet parking at this establishment. She is a dropout. She sells scrapped office junk. Stop indulging her." David straightened his posture. His professional, deferential demeanor hardened instantly as he looked down at my brother. "I will do no such thing," Sir David replied with icy precision. "Miss Nia does not need to pay for her meal tonight, or any night. As of 9 o'clock this morning, she is the sole owner of the Sterling and its entire parent hospitality group." The silence that blanketed the room was absolute and suffocating. I watched the color drain completely from Harper's perfectly contoured face. Her pale blue eyes darted from me to David and back again, desperately searching for the punchline to a joke she simply could not comprehend. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being superior in dining at places where people like me were not supposed to be allowed through the front door. My father sat completely paralyzed. I saw the gears turning in his head. "You bought the restaurant group?" Elias asked, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "That acquisition was valued at over $50 million. How could you possibly have the capital for a corporate takeover of that magnitude?" David did not miss a beat. "Ms. Nia is the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Holdings, sir. They acquired our parent company's entire debt portfolio last quarter and executed a full corporate buyout this morning. She is the most powerful asset liquidator in the Southeast." Apex Holdings. My father repeated the name like it was a curse word. He knew exactly who they were. In the Atlanta commercial real estate and finance sectors, Apex Holdings was the apex predator. They were the invisible, ruthless hand that bought up distressed assets, liquidated failing empires, and stripped arrogant executives of their golden parachutes. He just never knew the shark running the entire operation was the daughter he had aggressively written off as a failure. I reached out, picked up my Centurion card, and slid it smoothly back into my bag. I did not break eye contact with my brother. "David," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm, "please check the VIP registry for Marcus Wilson." David immediately pulled a slim tablet from his inside jacket pocket and tapped the screen a few times. "Yes, Ms. Nia. He is currently listed as a Platinum Tier member. He holds standing reservations for the best table in the main dining room every Friday night." "Not anymore," I stated coldly. "Revoke his membership effective immediately. Cancel all of his standing reservations. If he wishes to dine here in the future, he can wait in the cancellation line outside with the general public. Furthermore, please ensure his corporate expense account is no longer accepted at any of our affiliated luxury properties across the city." Marcus turned a violent, blotchy shade of crimson. His entire social identity in Atlanta relied heavily on his VIP status at exclusive places like the Sterling. It was exactly how he impressed his high-profile clients. It was how he proved to Harper's blue blood friends that he belonged in their elite inner circle. Stripping him of that privilege right in front of his wife was the social equivalent of severing his oxygen supply. "You cannot do this!" Marcus hissed, his hands gripping the edge of the heavy table so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. "I am your flesh and blood. You cannot humiliate me like this." "You are a parasite," I corrected him, my voice steady, but cutting through the thick tension like a razor. "You sit here eating expensive steaks you cannot actually afford, wearing designer suits you bought on credit, trying desperately to impress a family that secretly despises you. You are a clown playing a rich man. I am the one who owns the circus." Harper gasped loudly, clutching the pearls at her throat. She looked frantically at Marcus, expecting him to assert his dominance, to put me back in my place, to defend the honor of her so-called old money status. Marcus saw her looking. His fragile ego simply could not handle the sheer humiliation of being completely emasculated by his black sheep sister in front of his wealthy white wife. With a sudden violent roar, Marcus swept his arm aggressively across the table. His heavy crystal wine glass flew through the air and shattered violently against the wall, sending dark red wine splattering like blood across the expensive silk wallpaper. David instinctively stepped forward to shield me, but I did not even flinch. I just sat perfectly still and watched my brother unravel. "You think you are God now because you bought one restaurant group." Marcus spat, his chest heaving with exertion as he leaned over the table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You made a massive, fatal mistake tonight, Nia. You forget exactly who I am married into." Harper's father sits on the board of the largest financial institutions in the South. I will make one phone call. One call, and her family will use every ounce of their political and financial power to crush Apex Holdings into dust. I will see you bankrupt, humiliated, and begging on the street by Monday morning. The silence that followed my statement was absolute. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the private dining room was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Harper stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the perfectly applied blush on her cheeks completely gone. She looked like a ghost. She knew I was telling the truth. She knew the secret she and her father had desperately tried to hide behind country club memberships and charity galas was now sitting on the table in front of her husband's family. Marcus, however, was incapable of processing reality. He shook his head aggressively, his face contorted in a mix of panic and denial. "You are lying," Marcus shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are a pathological liar, Nia. Harper's family owns half of Savannah. They have trusts that date back a century. You are just saying this to deflect from the fact that you have no class, no pedigree, and no respect." I did not even look at him. My eyes remained fixed on my mother. Vivian had stood frozen after slapping me, her hand still slightly raised. But as Marcus yelled, she snapped back to life. Instead of questioning the massive financial revelation I had just dropped, she doubled down on her blind allegiance to her son. Vivian grabbed my shoulder, her perfectly manicured acrylic nails digging painfully into my skin. She leaned in close, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper that carried across the quiet room. "I do not care what imaginary paperwork you think you hold." Vivian spat her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy. "You will not disrespect your brother's wife. You will not jeopardize the alliance this family has built. Do you understand me? You think your little corporate title means anything in the real world. You think having money changes who you are." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me, feeling the last remaining shred of daughterly affection wither and die. "Let me explain how the world actually works." Nia, my mother, continued, her voice rising, completely unashamed of her own internalized hatred. "You are a single black woman. You can acquire all the businesses you want, but you will never have the generational prestige that Harper brings to this table. Marcus is elevating our bloodline. He married into a family that has historical significance, a family that grants us entry into circles we could never access on our own. He is the male heir to your father's legacy, and Harper is the key to solidifying our status. You are putting all of that at risk out of pure, bitter jealousy." The sickness in her words was staggering. She was openly admitting that she viewed our own heritage as a deficit, a stain that could only be cleansed by proximity to whiteness and old money. She viewed Marcus as a king simply because he was a man, and she viewed me as collateral damage, a stepping stone to be crushed under his feet. Vivian tightened her grip on my shoulder. "You are going to transfer whatever deeds or debts you bought directly to your brother. You will put them in Marcus's name. It is the only way to make things right. You will give him the leverage to save Harper's family estate, and you will do it quietly. If you do this, your father and I might forgive your little outburst today. We might still allow you a seat at our table." I looked at my father. Elias sat rigidly in his chair, swirling his bourbon. He did not object. He did not defend me. He simply watched, waiting to see if I would submit to my mother's demands. He wanted me to hand over millions of dollars in assets to his golden boy. He fully expected me to cave under the weight of my mother's psychological abuse. I reached up and wrapped my fingers around my mother's wrist. I did not squeeze hard, but I applied enough firm, unyielding pressure to let her know she was no longer dealing with the scared, obedient girl she had raised. I slowly, deliberately removed her hand from my shoulder and pushed it away. "Do not ever touch me again," I said. My voice was quiet, lacking any of the frantic anger they were displaying, which only made it more terrifying. Vivian gasped, stumbling back a half step, as if I had burned her. "You want to talk about elevating our bloodline?" I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit. "You are sitting here worshipping a woman who brings nothing but debt and deception to this family. You are so blinded by your own feelings of racial inferiority that you cannot see you are being used. Harper's family does not respect you. They do not view you as equals. They view Marcus as a walking ATM." I turned my attention to Harper, who was now visibly shaking. "Let us talk about that historical significance," I said, projecting my voice so every single word echoed clearly in the room. "When your father's shipping logistics company folded, he did not turn to his wealthy country club friends for a bailout. They all knew he was toxic. They knew he had squandered the family trusts on bad investments and private poker games. He came to Apex Holdings. He came to my firm begging for a high-interest bridge loan to keep the Savannah estate out of foreclosure." Marcus slammed his hand on the table again. "Stop lying. Her father is retired. He manages their philanthropic foundation. I finally looked at my brother, letting a cold smile touch my lips. He manages nothing, Marcus. And if you had an ounce of actual business acumen, you would have run a background check on your precious bride before you signed the marriage license. Did you never wonder why her family insisted on a destination wedding that you had to pay for? Did you never wonder why her father suddenly downsized his corporate office? Marcus opened his mouth to shout another denial, but Harper suddenly buried her face in her hands. A wretched, guttural sob escaped her lips. Harper, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a confused, terrified register. Harper, tell her she is lying. Tell them your family is fine. Harper just shook her head, unable to look him in the eye. The facade was completely shattered. The golden girl of Southern high society was sitting in a puddle of her own lies, exposed as completely bankrupt. My mother stared at Harper, her expression morphing from frantic defense to absolute horror. The realization that she had just slapped her own daughter. The daughter who actually held the real power to defend a woman who was entirely broke, washed over her face. Vivian looked at her hand, the one she had used to strike me, and began to tremble. You wanted me to hand over the deeds to save her family, I asked my mother, my tone merciless. You wanted me to transfer my hard-earned empire to a man who is too stupid to realize his own wife has been siphoning funds from his joint accounts to pay her father's legal fees. Marcus snapped his head toward me. What are you talking about? I picked up my designer bag and adjusted the strap on my shoulder. Check your offshore investment accounts, Marcus. The ones you thought you hid so cleverly from Dad. Take a really close look at the wire transfers made over the last 6 months. Harper has been bleeding you dry to keep her family's creditors at bay. You thought you were buying your way into high society. You were actually just funding their life support. Elias finally reacted. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He stood up, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward. It hit the floor with a loud crash. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of rage and profound disappointment. Is this true? Elias roared, his booming voice vibrating the crystal glasses on the table. Have you been letting this woman steal from our company accounts to pay off her father's gambling debts? Marcus stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. Dad, I can explain. I did not know she was taking the money. I gave her access to the accounts for household expenses. You gave a bankrupt socialite unrestricted access to our firm's liquid capital. Elias shouted, advancing toward Marcus. I groomed you to take over an empire, and you let a pretty blonde face scam you out of millions. The chaos I had orchestrated was beautiful. My father was turning on his golden child. My brother was realizing his marriage was a financial trap. My mother was choking on her own toxic ideology. They were completely consuming each other, tearing each other apart over the very status and money they had used to oppress me my entire life. I walked toward the heavy oak doors of the private dining room. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to throw a tantrum. I had executed my strategy with flawless precision. I paused with my hand on the brass doorknob and looked back at the wreckage of my family. You all spent my entire life treating me like an outcast because I refused to play by your twisted, hypocritical rules, I said. You wanted me to be the scapegoat. You wanted me to stay at the bottom so you could feel tall. But while you were busy playing dress up and begging for validation from people who despise you, I was building an actual fortress. I locked eyes with my father. Enjoy your dinner, Elias. And when you call your lawyers tomorrow to try and figure out how to salvage Marcus's financial mess, tell them to check the ownership records of your corporate headquarters. You might find that your landlord recently changed. I opened the door and stepped out into the softly lit hallway of the restaurant, leaving them trapped in the nightmare of their own making. I walked past David, the manager, who gave me another respectful nod. I did not look back. I had delivered the first massive blow, but I knew my father. He was a cornered predator, and men like him do not lose gracefully. They retaliate. I knew a brutal legal war was coming, but I was already 10 steps ahead of them. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in Midtown Atlanta. The view of the skyline was immaculate, a sprawling testament to power and commerce. I stood behind my desk holding a cup of black coffee, watching the traffic crawl along Peachtree Street. It was barely 9 o'clock, but the wheels of my retaliation were already turning at maximum speed. I had barely slept, fueled entirely by the adrenaline of last night's confrontation and the cold, precise calculations of the moves I had to make next. The heavy glass doors to my executive suite swung open with a violent rush of air. My assistant, a brilliant young woman named Chloe, tried to step in front of the intruders, her voice raised in sharp protest. I raised a single hand, silencing Chloe, and gestured for her to step aside. Sterling Vance, my father's lead corporate attorney, marched into my office as if he owned the entire building. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed in a bespoke charcoal pinstripe suit, reeking of expensive cologne and unearned arrogance. He was accompanied by a nervous-looking junior associate who carried a thick leather briefcase. Vance had been my father's legal attack dog for 2 decades. He was the man Elias used to bully contractors, intimidate local politicians, and crush anyone who dared to stand in the way of his real estate empire. Vance looked around my pristine office, his lip curling into a sneer, clearly refusing to process the reality of my success. "You can drop the powerful CEO act," Nia Vance said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your father sent me to put an end to this ridiculous charade." I walked slowly around my desk and leaned against the edge of the polished mahogany wood. "You are trespassing in a secure corporate facility, Sterling. I suggest you state your business quickly before I have my security team escort you out by the collar of that overpriced suit." Vance let out a harsh, barking laugh. He snapped his fingers, and the junior associate rushed forward, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and slapping them down onto the surface of my desk. The bold black letters across the top page read Fulton County Superior Court. "Consider yourself served," Vance announced, crossing his arms over his chest. "Your father is filing an emergency petition for a conservatorship. We are requesting that the court immediately strip you of your access to your late grandfather's trust fund. We are also filing an injunction to freeze all of your personal and corporate assets pending a full medical and psychological evaluation." I stared at the thick stack of papers, my face completely impassive. A conservatorship, it was the ultimate weapon of toxic control. My father was actually trying to legally declare me incompetent to steal the money my grandfather had explicitly left to me. "Your behavior at the restaurant last night was deeply disturbing." Vance continued, stepping closer to my desk, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "You were raving. You made wildly fabricated claims about purchasing a $50 million restaurant group. You verbally assaulted your brother and his wife. Your father and your mother are deeply concerned about your mental health. They believe you are having a severe psychotic break and are no longer capable of managing your own finances. As the contingent trustee listed in your grandfather's original documents, Elias is stepping in to protect the family assets from your erratic, self-destructive behavior." The sheer audacity of the gaslighting was breathtaking. They were weaponizing the legal system to paint me as an insane, bitter woman simply because I had humiliated them with the truth. My mother had physically assaulted me. My brother had thrown a glass across a restaurant, yet I was the one being labeled as a danger to myself. I picked up the petition and slowly flipped through the pages. The legal maneuvering was incredibly aggressive, but it was also incredibly sloppy. It reeked of desperation. My grandfather, a man who had built a modest trucking company into a highly profitable logistics firm, had seen right through my father's obsession with high society. He knew Elias cared more about country club status than hard work. That is exactly why my grandfather bypassed Elias entirely and placed his entire $50 million fortune into a trust that matured on my 30th birthday. He knew I was the only person in the family who actually understood the value of a dollar. I tossed the petition back onto the desk. The loud smack of the paper hitting the wood echoed in the quiet office. "You drafted this at 3 o'clock in the morning." "Sterling," I stated, meeting his arrogant gaze with absolute freezing calm. "There are typographical errors on page 4, and you cited a precedent in section 2 that was overturned by the Georgia Supreme Court 5 years ago. You are slipping. But more importantly, you are lying to my face. This has absolutely nothing to do with my mental health." Vance bristled, his face flushing an angry shade of red. "You are clearly unwell, Nia. Sign the acknowledgement of service. If you cooperate, your father might agree to keep this out of the public eye. If you fight us, we will drag your medical records through open court and destroy whatever fragile reputation you think you have built in this city." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was a sound that seemed to deeply unnerve the older lawyer. "You and Elias really think I am stupid," I said, pushing myself off the edge of the desk and standing at my full height. "You think I do not know exactly what happened after I walked out of that restaurant last night. You think I do not know why my father is suddenly so desperate to seize control of $50 million in liquid cash before the banks open today." Vance shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing. "I have no idea what paranoid delusion you are talking about." "Let us talk about Marcus," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Vance. "My golden child brother thought he was a financial genius. When Harper's father came to him begging for money to cover his massive offshore gambling debts, Marcus did not just use his own personal savings. He could not. His personal accounts were completely drained from trying to keep up with Harper's lavish lifestyle. So Marcus did something incredibly reckless. To secure the bridge loans for his father-in-law, Marcus used the commercial properties owned by my father's real estate firm as collateral. He cross-collateralized the entire family business to secretly bail out a bankrupt white family who despises us." The junior associate behind Vance suddenly dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the floor, but Vance did not even turn around to look. The arrogant lawyer was staring at me, a bead of cold sweat forming at his temple. "And because Harper's father defaulted on his original debt obligations 48 hours ago." I continued, my voice sharp and relentless. "Those loans Marcus guaranteed have been called in. The creditors are demanding immediate payment in full. If Elias does not produce $50 million in liquid capital by the close of business today, the banks are going to initiate foreclosure proceedings on his entire commercial real estate portfolio." My father is not trying to protect me, Sterling. He is trying to steal my grandfather's money to plug the massive bleeding hole that his precious male heir just blew in the side of the family empire. Vance swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. "The fact that you have somehow acquired illegally obtained confidential financial information only proves that you are operating completely outside the bounds of rational behavior. Sign the paper, Nia. You cannot win a protracted legal war against your father's resources. We will bleed you dry in court fees alone." "My father has no resources left to fight me with," I replied. "His entire net worth is currently trapped in frozen toxic assets, thanks to his son's absolute incompetence. And you know it. That is why you are standing in my office sweating through your expensive suit trying to bully me into handing over my only leverage." I reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a solid gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. I uncapped it with a smooth, fluid motion. Vance let out a heavy breath, a triumphant smirk finally returning to his face. He thought he had broken me. He thought the threat of a public mental health smear campaign was enough to force my compliance. He thought I was still the quiet, obedient daughter who would sacrifice her own security to save the men in her family from the consequences of their own spectacular failures. I pulled the acknowledgement of service form toward me, pressed the gold nib against the paper, and signed my name in bold, sweeping strokes. "A wise decision," Vance said, stepping forward to snatch the document. "Your father will be pleased that you finally decided to act like a dutiful daughter. We will take control of the trust accounts by noon." I handed the document to his junior associate, instead never breaking eye contact with Vance. "I am signing this to legally acknowledge that you have officially initiated a hostile action against me," I said quietly, "which means the gloves are entirely off." Vance frowned, confusion breaking through his arrogant facade. "What are you talking about? You just surrendered the trust." "I surrendered nothing," I replied. "I just gave myself legal cause to destroy you." Without taking my eyes off the lawyer, I reached my left hand out and pressed a single silver button on the sleek communication console sitting on my desk. The intercom emitted a sharp, singular beep that cut through the heavy tension in my office. "Execute Directive Phoenix Y," instructed, leaning closer to the microphone. "All portfolios, effective immediately." "Right away, Ms. Nia," my chief financial officer responded smoothly through the speaker. Sterling Vance paused with his hand hovering over the brass handle of my office door. He looked back at me, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. He clearly thought I was putting on a theatrical performance for his benefit. You can play CEO all you want with your little intercoms, Nia Vance sneered, adjusting his expensive silk tie. But playing games will not stop a Fulton County judge from granting this conservatorship. I suggest you start packing up this office. Your father will be sending a team to take inventory of the premises by this afternoon. I did not bother to reply. I simply clasped my hands together on my desk and waited. I knew exactly how long the banking algorithms took to process a mass default protocol. It took exactly 24 seconds. The silence in the room stretched thick and suffocating. The junior associate shifted nervously from foot to foot, clearly eager to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my suite. Vance rolled his eyes, turning back to the door. Then the shrill ring of a cell phone shattered the quiet. It was not my phone. It was the junior associate's phone. He fumbled frantically inside his suit jacket to silence it, muttering a quick apology to his boss. But before he could even hit the mute button, Vance's own phone began to ring. It was a loud, obnoxious, traditional ringtone that echoed obtrusively off the glass walls of my office. Vance pulled the device from his pocket with an irritated sigh, fully intending to decline the call. However, the moment he saw the caller ID, his arrogant posture stiffened. "It is your father," Vance muttered, shooting me a warning glare. "This is exactly what I am talking about. He is already moving to secure the family assets. Do not say a single word." Vance pressed the phone to his ear. "Elias, I just served her. She signed the acknowledgement. We are filing the paperwork with the court right now." Vance never got to finish his sentence. Even from across the large expanse of my executive desk, I could hear my father screaming through the receiver. The sheer volume and panic in Elias's voice was so intense that Vance instinctively pulled the phone away from his ear, wincing in physical pain. "What do you mean they are frozen?" Vance asked, his professional composure cracking instantly. Elias, slow down. "Which accounts are frozen?" The screaming continued, frantic and breathless. The junior associate was now staring at Vance with wide, terrified eyes. I remained perfectly still, watching the mighty legal attack dog of the Wilson Empire begin to sweat. "That is impossible!" Vance stammered, his face draining of color as he listened to my father's panicked rambling. "The commercial credit lines are secured by the Midtown properties. The banks cannot freeze those accounts without a 30-day notice of default. I drafted those lending agreements myself." "Elias, calm down. Who told you the lines of credit were suspended?" Vance lowered the phone slightly, his eyes darting toward me with a sudden, horrifying realization. He pressed a button on the screen, putting the call on speakerphone. My father's booming, frantic voice instantly filled the room. "Every single bank is shutting us out! Sterling!" Elias yelled, his voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. "Wells Fargo, Bank of America, the private equity lenders. All of them. They are rejecting our wire transfers. They are freezing the payroll accounts. The chief lending officer at Chase just told me that a massive margin call was triggered 5 minutes ago. Someone initiated a hostile acceleration clause on our entire debt portfolio. We are entirely locked out of our own capital. Sterling, do you understand what I'm saying? We cannot even pay the utility bills on our buildings." Vance stared at me, his jaw slack. "Elias, the debt portfolio is distributed among a dozen different hedge funds," Vance said, trying to inject logic into a situation that had already spiraled beyond his control. "They would have to coordinate a synchronized strike to freeze the entire network. Who initiated the acceleration clause? Who owns the primary notes?" There was a ragged, heavy silence on the other end of the line. When my father finally spoke, his voice was hollow, stripped of all its usual booming authority. "Apex Holdings," Elias whispered. Vance physically stumbled backward, bumping into the junior associate. His briefcase slipped from his grip, hitting the floor with a dull thud. He looked at me as if I had suddenly transformed into a monster right in front of his eyes. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk, and directed my voice toward the phone in Vance's shaking hand. "Good morning, Elias," I said. My voice was incredibly calm, a stark contrast to the sheer panic radiating from the speaker. "I see you finally checked the ownership records." Nia, my father, gasped, the shock vibrating through the connection. "What have you done? Turn off the freeze. Tell your people to reverse the margin call right now. This is a misunderstanding. You are destroying your own family's company. I am simply collecting what is owed, I replied smoothly. You spent the last 3 years pulling equity out of your commercial properties to fund Marcus's endless string of failures. Every time he launched a new idiotic venture to impress his country club friends. You quietly took out another high-interest loan against the family real estate to cover his losses. You thought you were being so clever dealing with faceless secondary lenders to hide the debt from your shareholders. My father was breathing heavily into the phone, completely paralyzed by the exposure of his secret financial mismanagement. What you failed to realize, I continued, is that my firm specializes in acquiring toxic debt from secondary lenders. For 36 months, Elias, every single time you mortgaged a piece of our family's legacy to protect your golden boy, Apex Holdings swooped in and bought that note. I own the mortgage on your midtown high-rises. I own the liens on your suburban shopping centers. I own the debt on the very corporate headquarters where you are sitting right now. I have been quietly buying up pieces of your empire for 3 years, and you were too arrogant to ever look at the signature at the bottom of your own lending agreements. You planned this, my father hissed, a sudden venomous anger replacing his panic. You maliciously plotted to ruin your own brother. You orchestrated this entire financial trap because you were jealous of his position in the company. I did not plot to ruin Marcus, I corrected him sharply. Marcus ruined himself by cross-collateralizing your properties to bail out his wife's bankrupt family. He violated the covenants of your lending agreements, which gave me the legal right to accelerate the debt and demand payment in full immediately. I am simply holding you accountable to the contracts you signed. You owe Apex Holdings $85 million, Elias. And since your accounts are frozen, I know you do not have the liquidity to pay me. Sterling Vance frantically grabbed his phone, turning off the speaker function and pressing the device back to his ear. Elias, do not say another word to her, Vance urged, his voice frantic. I am leaving her office right now. Do not communicate with her without me present. Vance hung up the phone and looked at me. The arrogant, condescending lawyer who had marched into my office minutes ago was completely gone. In his place stood a man who realized he was representing a client who was functionally bankrupt. Vance knew that if Elias's assets were frozen by a major liquidator, the legal fees would never be paid. You cannot maintain a credit freeze of this magnitude, Vance said, though his voice lacked any real conviction. A judge will see this as retaliatory action based on the conservatorship filing. We will tie you up in litigation for a decade. You can certainly try, Sterling, I replied, gesturing toward the door. But you cannot fight a corporate takeover with frozen accounts. And considering I hold the primary position on all of Elias's debt, I get to decide who gets paid during the liquidation process. I assure you, legal counsel is at the very bottom of my priority list. I suggest you ask for your retainer up front next time. Vance's face twitched. He understood the threat perfectly. He turned on his heel and practically sprinted out of my office, the junior associate scrambling to pick up the dropped briefcase and rushing out closely behind him. The heavy glass doors swung shut, sealing my office in a profound, deeply satisfying silence. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city that my father had always claimed belonged to him and my brother. It was a beautiful, clear morning. The empire they had weaponized against me was currently collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance, and I had orchestrated the entire demolition without raising my voice once. I walked back toward my desk, feeling a sense of absolute clarity. I had anticipated my father's hostility, and I had neutralized his legal threat by completely severing his financial lifeline. But just as I reached for my coffee cup, the heavy glass doors to my executive suite burst open for the second time that morning. My assistant Chloe rushed in looking genuinely flustered. Miss Nia, I am so sorry, Chloe said, trying to block the doorway. I told her you were not accepting visitors and security is on their way up, but she refused to wait in the reception area. Harper shoved past my assistant, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She was dressed in a pristine white Chanel suit, her blonde hair perfectly blown out, carrying a Birkin bag that likely cost more than my assistant's annual salary. Despite the fact that her own family was bankrupt, despite the fact that her husband's family business was currently being dismantled by my company. Harper still carried herself with an infuriating air of aristocratic superiority. She stopped in the center of my office, looking around at my expensive artwork and custom furniture with a deeply condescending expression, as if she were inspecting a servant's quarters. "You can leave us," Harper ordered, waving a dismissive hand at my assistant, without even bothering to look at her. "Nia and I need to have a private conversation woman to woman, so we can finally fix this ridiculous melodramatic mess you have created." I gave Chloe a brief, reassuring nod. My assistant hesitated for a fraction of a second before turning on her heel and pulling the heavy glass doors shut behind her. The click of the latch echoed in the vast office, sealing Harper and me inside. Harper did not waste a single second. She dropped her designer handbag onto one of my custom leather visitor chairs with a careless thud and began pacing the length of my Persian rug. "Look at you," Harper scoffed, waving a hand vaguely at the panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline behind me. "You actually believe you have won something today. You think freezing Elias out of his bank accounts and buying up my father's debt makes you powerful. It just makes you look like exactly what you are, Nia. An angry, bitter woman throwing a spectacularly expensive temper tantrum because she never fit in." I remained perfectly still, resting my hands on the cool mahogany surface of my desk. I let her speak. Men like my father and brother used volume to dominate a room, but women like Harper used a different kind of weapon. They used a cloying, weaponized victimhood wrapped in generational privilege. "You are going to reverse the margin call on your father's properties," Harper commanded, stopping in front of my desk and planting her hands on her hips. "You are going to transfer my father's debt portfolio back to a standard lending institution with favorable terms. And you are going to do it today. If you comply, I will personally ensure that Marcus forgives this massive overstep. We will allow you to keep playing CEO in this sterile little office, and we will not ruin you." "Ruin me," I repeated, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "That is a fascinating choice of words, Harper. Please explain the logistics of how a woman whose family estate is currently in default plans to ruin a billionaire asset liquidator." Harper leaned forward, her blue eyes flashing with a toxic, predatory gleam. "You think money erases where you came from?" she asked, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You think wealth buys you actual class or protection in the South? Let me educate you on how this city really works. I sit on the board of 3 different regional media conglomerates. I am chairwoman of the most prestigious philanthropic societies in Georgia. I have editors and journalists on my personal speed dial." She smiled, a cold, rigid stretching of her lips. "If you do not release our assets by noon, I will make one phone call. By tomorrow morning, every newspaper and business journal in the state will run a front-page expose on you. Do you know what the narrative will be? They will paint you as exactly what society expects you to be. An unstable, aggressive, out-of-control black woman who used deceitful tactics to launch a hostile takeover against her own flesh and blood. They will frame you as a predator attacking my family's historic, beloved legacy. Who do you think the public will believe, Nia? Who do you think the courts will sympathize with, the refined, charitable Southern daughter trying to protect her family, or the bitter dropout trying to destroy one?" There it was, the ultimate threat. She was openly weaponizing her race and her fabricated social standing, fully expecting me to cower under the weight of a stereotype she planned to broadcast to the world. She thought the threat of being labeled aggressive or unstable would force me into submission. I slowly stood up, pushing my chair back. I walked around the edge of my desk, stopping just a few feet away from her. Harper instinctively took a half step back, her false bravado faltering for a microsecond before she forced herself to stand tall. "That is a beautifully crafted threat, Harper," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "It relies on a very specific, very effective social dynamic. You are banking on your reputation as a pillar of the charitable community to lend credibility to your lies. After all, you are the founder and primary director of the Savannah Futures Initiative." Harper lifted her chin, a flicker of pride crossing her face. "I am. And that organization does more good for underprivileged youth in a month than your predatory liquidation firm will do in a lifetime." I tilted my head, studying her with absolute surgical precision. "It is a brilliant concept for a charity," I agreed. "A massive scholarship fund specifically designed to provide full tuition for low-income Black students across Georgia. It makes you look like a saint. It grants you untouchable moral authority in your social circles. It is the perfect shield. There is just one catastrophic flaw in your operation. Harper's eyes narrowed. I have no idea what you are implying. I walked back to my desk and picked up a sleek black digital tablet. I tapped the screen once, bringing up a highly detailed financial spreadsheet, and held it out so she could see the bright red columns of numbers. I am implying that you are a thief, I stated clearly, and not even a particularly smart one. Harper froze. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like chalk. When my firm acquired your father's offshore gambling debts, we also acquired the rights to audit all connected financial entities to trace hidden assets. I explained, my voice echoing off the glass walls like a judge delivering a verdict. That included the Savannah Futures Initiative, since your father is listed as a primary guarantor. My forensic accountants spent the entire weekend tearing your books apart. That is illegal. Harper stammered, her voice suddenly breathless and thin. You have no right to look at those accounts. I have every legal right, I corrected her. And what we found was absolutely fascinating. Last year, your highly publicized charity gala raised $2.4 million from wealthy donors who wanted to feel good about helping minority students. Yet according to the actual disbursement records, only $50,000 was ever paid out in actual scholarships. I took a step closer, watching her chest begin to heave with panicked breaths. Where did the other $2 million go, Harper? I asked. Because my accountants tracked every single wire transfer. Do you want to know what they found? They found $300,000 funneled directly to a shell company to pay the property taxes on your father's failing estate. They found $50,000 routed to a luxury travel agency to cover your month-long vacation to St. Bart's. They even found the purchase order for the pristine white Chanel suit you are currently wearing. Harper shook her head violently, her hands coming up to grasp her own arms as if she were suddenly freezing. No, that is an administrative error. The funds were commingled by mistake. Marcus handles the accounting transfers for the foundation. He is the one who moves the money. You cannot pin this on me. Yao built your entire social identity on being a savior to Black youth. I continued, my voice laced with absolute disgust. But the reality is that you have been actively stealing millions of dollars from the very marginalized students you claim to champion, all to fund your designer handbags and keep your bankrupt father out of prison. You are a parasite feeding off the people you look down upon. You cannot prove any of this, Harper hissed, though her eyes were wide with pure terror. You have manipulated the data. Marcus will testify that the accounts were mismanaged by a third-party vendor. He will protect me. He loves me. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at her delusion. She actually believed my brother, a man entirely driven by his own fragile ego, would sacrifice himself to save her. Yes, Marcus handles a great deal of your finances, I agreed, walking back to my desk, including the primary platinum credit card that is registered exclusively in your name, the one you tied to your personal trust account before your family went completely broke. I reached into my bottom desk drawer and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I did not hand it to her. I tossed it onto the polished wood of my desk. It slid across the surface, stopping just inches from her trembling hands. Marcus has been very busy lately, I said softly. I suggest you open the folder. Harper stared at the manila envelope as if it were a live explosive. Her manicured fingers shook violently as she reached out, flipped open the cover, and looked at the glossy 8x10 photographs inside. I watched her entire world shatter in real time. The photographs were incredibly high resolution, taken by a premier private investigator my firm had retained months ago. They showed Marcus walking into the lobby of a five-star hotel in Buckhead. They showed him holding the waist of a stunning dark-haired woman who was very clearly not his wife. They showed the two of them kissing intimately on a balcony. But the photographs were not the actual weapon. The weapon was the stack of printed financial receipts stapled to the back of the photos. Harper let out a choked, devastated gasp as she flipped to the financial documents. Your husband has exquisite taste. I noted, my tone entirely devoid of sympathy. He spent $12,000 on diamond earrings at Tiffany's last Tuesday. He booked a $20,000 private villa in Aspen for next weekend. He bought her a brand new Range Rover. And the best part, Harper, he charged every single penny of his infidelity to your personal credit card. He is using the exact same money you stole from black students to fund his mistress. The silence in my office shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Harper dropped the glossy photograph as if they had physically burned her fingers. They scattered across the polished mahogany of my desk, the vibrant images of Marcus and his mistress, landing face up next to the itemized credit card statements. Harper stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the thick Persian rug. She hit the edge of the leather visitor chair and collapsed into it, all the aristocratic superiority completely draining from her posture. She looked small, fragile, and utterly broken. He told me he was in Buckhead pitching a new commercial development to foreign investors, Harper whispered, her voice cracking. The aggressive, threatening socialite from 5 minutes ago was entirely gone. In her place sat a woman who was rapidly realizing her entire life was a carefully constructed fiction. He said the Tiffany charge was a corporate gift for a retiring board member. Marcus has never closed a deal with a foreign investor in his life, I stated, my voice devoid of pity. He lacks the discipline to negotiate a standard lease agreement, let alone an international commercial contract. He is a parasite, Harper. He latched onto your family name to elevate his social standing, and he used my father's money to fund his delusions of grandeur. But when my father's money dried up because of the frozen accounts, Marcus needed a new host to drain. Harper shook her head, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. No, my family is broke, you said it yourself. My father's estate is in default. Marcus knows there is no money left to take from us. We are drowning. Your father's liquid assets are gone, I corrected her, stepping around the desk to look down at her. But your family still has the historical generation trusts, the ones that have been locked in probate for the last decade, the ones you explicitly told Marcus about before your wedding. Harper's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with fresh, absolute terror. The generation trusts are restricted. They require dual signatures from a primary beneficiary and a designated financial conservator to authorize any withdrawals. My father is the beneficiary, and Marcus is the... Her voice choked, the horrifying realization cutting off her words. Marcus is the designated financial conservator, I finished for her. Elias made sure of that when he helped your father restructure his debts 3 years ago. Elias thought he was securing your family's loyalty. Marcus saw it as an open vault. I picked up the tablet from my desk and swiped to a new screen. I held it out in front of her face while you were busy playing the charitable savior and skimming off the top of the Savannah Futures initiative to buy designer suits. Your husband was executing a much larger theft. Marcus did not just use the charity money to buy his mistress a Range Rover. He accessed your grandfather's restricted generation trusts. Harper stared at the digital ledger on the screen. Her breathing became shallow and erratic. What am I looking at? She gasped. You are looking at a series of wire transfers executed over the past 8 months, I explained, pointing to the descending column of massive figures. Marcus forged your father's signature on the dual authorization forms. He bypassed the probate restrictions by claiming the funds were being moved into high-yield, low-risk municipal bonds to protect the principal against inflation. The bank executives, desperate to please a member of the powerful Wilson family, approved the transfers without proper verification. Where did the money go? Harper demanded, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. Where did he put my family's money? He put it exactly where every desperate, incompetent man puts stolen money when he thinks he is smarter than the market, I said coldly. He dumped it into unregulated cryptocurrency exchanges. He bought millions of dollars in highly volatile digital assets, convinced he was going to double the family wealth, and proved to Elias that he was a financial visionary. Harper covered her mouth with both hands, a stifled sob escaping her throat. The market crashed last month. Harper, I continued, offering zero comfort. The specific digital assets Marcus purchased lost 80% of their value in less than 48 hours. Your family's generational wealth, the safety net that was supposed to protect your parents after the estate went into foreclosure, is completely gone. Vaporized. Marcus blew $12 million on digital nothingness, and he left your father holding the bag for the forged authorizations. Harper leaped out of the chair, her entire body shaking with a violent, uncontrollable rage. The realization that she was nothing more than a pawn, a convenient host for a parasite who despised her, finally broke through her denial. She was not a partner in a power couple. She was the victim of a catastrophic financial crime orchestrated by the man she slept next to every night. "I will kill him!" Harper screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. She scrambled to grab her Birkin bag from the chair, digging frantically inside for her phone. "I am calling the police. I am calling the FBI. I am going to have him arrested for wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. I will call every media contact I have and destroy him on the evening news. He will rot in federal prison. Put the phone down, Harper." I commanded, my voice slicing through her hysteria like a scalpel. "Do not tell me what to do!" she shrieked, unlocking her screen. "He stole $12 million from my family. He ruined us. I am going to make sure he never sees the outside of a jail cell." I moved faster than she anticipated. I grabbed her wrist, my grip iron tight, and forced the phone down to her side. She gasped, trying to pull away, but I held her firmly in place. "If you make a single phone call right now, you will go to prison right alongside him," I stated, locking my eyes onto hers. Harper froze, her struggles ceasing instantly. "What?" "Think about it," I said, releasing her wrist, but keeping my physical proximity dominant. "If you report Marcus to the federal authorities for embezzling from the Generation Trusts, they will immediately launch a full forensic audit of your entire financial history. They will freeze every account associated with your name. And when the FBI auditors start digging, what do you think they are going to find in the ledgers of the Savannah Futures Initiative?" Harper's eyes widened as the trap slammed shut around her. "They are going to find the $2 million you personally skimmed from scholarship funds meant for underprivileged Black teenagers." I continued, making sure she understood the absolute devastation awaiting her. "Marcus committed wire fraud, but you committed charity fraud. You stole from marginalized children to buy designer clothes and take vacations to St. Bart's. The media loves a scandal about a corrupt businessman, but they absolutely crucify a hypocritical white socialite who steals from minority scholarships. You will not just be arrested, you will be the most hated woman in the country." Harper stumbled backward, hitting the glass wall of my office. She slid down the glass, her pristine white Chanel suit crumpling as she sank to the floor. She pulled her knees to her chest, looking up at me with an expression of total helpless defeat. The powerful, threatening woman who had barged into my office 20 minutes ago was entirely eradicated. "What do I do?" she whispered, the fight completely drained from her voice. "I have nothing. My family is ruined. My husband is a thief who is sleeping with another woman. I am going to jail." "You are not going to jail," I said, walking back to my chair and sitting down. "Because you are going to do exactly what I tell you to do." Harper looked at me, desperate for any lifeline. "What do you want?" "Tomorrow morning, my father and his attack dog, Sterling Vance, are dragging me into Fulton County Superior Court," I explained, organizing the scattered photographs on my desk into a neat pile. "They filed an emergency petition for a conservatorship. Elias is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can seize control of my grandfather's trust fund. He needs my $50 million to save his real estate empire from the foreclosure I just triggered." Harper nodded slowly, wiping a streak of ruined mascara from her cheek. "How does that involve me?" "Elias needs to prove a pattern of erratic, destructive behavior to convince the judge that I am a danger to the family," I said. "He is planning to put you on the witness stand. He expects you to testify about my actions at the restaurant last night. He expects you to play the traumatized victim, to tell the judge that I violently threatened you and Marcus, and that I am completely detached from reality." "I will not testify," Harper said quickly, eager to please me. "I will refuse to go to court." "No," I corrected her, leaning forward. "You are going to go to court. You are going to take the stand exactly as Elias demands. But you are not going to say a single word about my mental health." Harper looked utterly confused. "Then what am I supposed to say?" "You are going to sit on that stand, look directly at the judge, and you are going to tell the court exactly what Marcus did to your family's generation trusts," I instructed, my voice ringing with cold authority. "You are going to present these credit card statements showing his infidelity. You are going to provide the transaction ledgers proving he funneled $12 million into dead cryptocurrency accounts. You are going to testify under oath that Elias Wilson knew about the embezzlement and filed this fraudulent conservatorship to steal my money to cover up his son's crimes. If I admit that in open court, Elias will destroy me, Harper protested, her voice trembling. He will expose the charity money I took. Elias does not know about the charity money, I said, smiling a slow, dangerous smile. Only my accountants know. And as long as you deliver exactly what I need on that witness stand tomorrow, my accountants will quietly wipe the Savannah Futures Initiative audit from their servers. Your secret remains buried forever. But if you deviate from the script for even 1 second, I will hand-deliver your financial records to the FBI myself. Harper stared at me from the floor, finally understanding the true scale of the power dynamic. I had not just defeated her, I had conscripted her into my army. I was turning the golden daughter-in-law into the very weapon that would execute my family in open court. Do we have an agreement, Harper? I asked, looking down at her. Harper slowly pulled herself up from the floor, smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt. She looked at the photographs on my desk, then looked at me. There was no defiance left in her eyes, only the hollow obedience of a woman who knew she had been completely conquered. We have an agreement, she whispered. Excellent, I said, pointing toward the heavy glass doors. Now get out of my office. You have testimony to practice. The heavy glass doors clicked shut behind Harper, sealing the silence in my office once again. I exhaled a slow, measured breath, allowing myself exactly 3 seconds of quiet satisfaction. I had successfully turned my brother's greatest asset into my ultimate weapon. Harper was now a loaded gun pointed directly at her own husband, completely under my control. But the war was far from over. I turned my attention back to the glowing monitors arrayed across my massive desk. When my firm acquired the toxic debt on my father's corporate headquarters, the very first administrative action I took was upgrading the building's internal security matrix. As the legal owner of the property, I possessed full unrestricted access to the surveillance systems. I tapped a few keys on my keyboard, bypassing the encrypted firewalls, and brought up the live high-definition audio and video feed from the executive boardroom of Elias's firm. The scene unfolding on my screen was a masterpiece of absolute unfiltered panic. Elias was pacing the length of the boardroom like a trapped, desperate animal. His expensive silk tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and his face was a dangerous, alarming shade of crimson. Marcus sat slumped at the massive mahogany table, his head buried in his hands, looking completely destroyed. The crushing reality of their financial situation had finally pierced through their generational arrogance. "They know everything!" Elias shouted, slamming his fist violently against the polished wood table. The audio feed picked up the sharp crack of the impact. "Every single bank has completely frozen our accounts. Apex Holdings did not just buy our debt. They leaked our entire financial vulnerability report to the primary lending institutions. The credit lines are gone. The payroll accounts are locked. We are bleeding out, Marcus. We do not have the liquidity to survive the next 24 hours. Marcus lifted his head, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. "We need a cash injection immediately, Dad. If we cannot show the board some kind of liquid capital by tomorrow morning, they will vote to remove you. They will dismantle the company and sell it for scraps." "There is no cash," Elias roared, pointing an accusing finger at his son. "You gambled away our leverage to save your bankrupt father-in-law. We are entirely boxed in. We are suffocating." I sat back in my leather chair, sipping my black coffee, watching the two men who had tormented me my entire life turn on each other. It was deeply satisfying, a perfect culmination of years of silent endurance. But I knew men like Elias and Marcus. They were predators, and cornered predators always look for a back door. Marcus suddenly sat up straight, a frantic, dangerous light sparking in his eyes. "Wait," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the hidden microphones picked up perfectly. "The Cayman offshore holding account. The emergency reserve fund you set up a decade ago." Elias stopped pacing, his chest heaving. "That account is locked," Elias replied, his tone laced with heavy caution. "It was structured as a legacy safeguard. It requires a dual signature for any emergency asset transfer. It requires my signature and your sister's signature. I tried to have her removed from the charter years ago, but the offshore regulations were too rigid. We cannot touch that money without Nia's explicit authorization." Marcus let out a harsh, bitter laugh, running a trembling hand through his hair. Do you honestly think she is going to authorize a transfer now? She is trying to destroy us. She will never sign that document. Then we are finished, Elias stated, slumping heavily into an empty chair. No, Marcus said, his voice turning cold and absolutely ruthless. We are not finished. I am not letting a bitter, jealous woman take down everything I have built. Marcus reached across the table and pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his leather briefcase. He frantically searched through the pages until he found the emergency asset transfer authorization form. He smoothed it out on the table, pulled a heavy gold pen from his pocket, and stared at the empty signature line. What are you doing? Elias asked, a mix of fear and dark anticipation echoing in his voice. I am saving this family, Marcus sneered, leaning over the paper. Nia thinks she is an unstoppable corporate genius. But at the end of the day, she is just a college dropout. She quit business school because she could not handle the pressure of real expectations. She does not understand the complexities of international offshore banking law. She thinks buying local debt makes her powerful, but she has absolutely no idea this reserve account even exists anymore. I watched the screen, my expression perfectly neutral. They were about to cross the line from civil misconduct into a major federal crime. Marcus began to practice my signature on a scrap piece of paper. His hand moved quickly, fueled by pure adrenaline and toxic entitlement. She is an uneducated girl playing a man's game, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with absolute, unfiltered contempt. She will never notice a quiet transfer in an account she forgot about 10 years ago. A dropout cannot outsmart a boardroom full of real executives. We move the funds, we show liquidity to the board, and we crush her conservatorship hearing tomorrow. Elias watched his son prepare to commit forgery, making no move to stop him. In fact, Elias nodded slowly, his own deeply rooted misogyny aligning perfectly with Marcus's desperation. You are right, Elias murmured, his eyes fixed on the moving pen. She lacks the academic pedigree to comprehend high-level corporate restructuring. Do it. I leaned closer to my monitor, ensuring the recording software was capturing every single second of the high-definition feed. I watched my brother expertly forge my signature on the bottom line of the emergency transfer document. I watched him scan the forged paper into his secure laptop. I watched him log into the offshore banking portal and upload the fraudulent authorization. The tension in the boardroom was suffocating. Marcus and Elias stared at the laptop screen, completely breathless. They were attempting to move millions of dollars through an illegal forged transaction. If the bank's security protocols flagged the signature, they would be immediately investigated for wire fraud. They were risking federal prison to maintain their fragile egos. Seconds ticked by. The loading icon on the screen spun in a slow, agonizing circle. I glanced at my own secondary monitor. I had set a specific digital trap around that exact offshore account 3 days ago. I had explicitly instructed the bank's automated system to bypass the standard signature verification protocols for any transfer initiated from Marcus's IP address. I wanted the door wide open. I wanted him to hang himself with his own arrogance. Suddenly, a bright green confirmation box flashed across Marcus's laptop screen on the security feed. Transaction approved. Funds transferred. Marcus threw his hands in the air, letting out a loud, triumphant shout. He jumped out of his chair, laughing wildly. We did it. The cash is moving. We have the liquidity. We are saved. Elias let out a massive sigh of relief, leaning back in his chair and running a shaking hand over his face. You did well, son. You outsmarted her. She overplayed her hand, and now we have the capital to bury her in court tomorrow. She is going to walk into that hearing thinking she has won, and we are going to humiliate her. They celebrated in the boardroom, slapping each other on the back, entirely convinced of their own brilliant superiority. They genuinely believed that they had won. They believed they had successfully outmaneuvered the naive college dropout. I sat alone in my quiet, pristine office, watching them celebrate their federal crime. I reached out and saved the video and audio files to an encrypted external drive. I had the complete, indisputable evidence of Marcus committing forgery and wire fraud, and I had Elias explicitly endorsing the crime on tape. They thought the cleared transaction was a victory. They had no idea it was the final fatal nail in their coffins. They had just provided me with the exact ammunition I needed to not only win the conservatorship hearing, but to dismantle their entire lives. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression in the empty room. Tomorrow was going to be an absolute bloodbath. The absolute bloodbath I anticipated did not take place in a sterile courtroom. Elias, ever the master of theatrical manipulation, had managed to delay the conservatorship hearing through an emergency motion, pivoting his strategy to a much grander stage. He needed public validation to cement his stolen victory. He needed an audience. 24 hours later, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Atlanta was bathed in the warm golden glow of crystal chandeliers. This was the Wilson Family Foundation annual gala, an obscenely expensive charity event designed exclusively to blind the city's elite to the reality of my family's impending financial ruin. The room was packed with senators, real estate tycoons, and old money socialites, all sipping vintage champagne, completely oblivious to the fact that the men hosting the party were running a corporate Ponzi scheme. I stepped through the gilded double doors, pausing at the top of the grand staircase to survey the room. I had selected a custom emerald green silk gown that swept the floor, paired with a diamond collar necklace that caught the light with every movement. I did not look like a woman on the verge of being declared mentally incompetent or financially stripped. I looked like the apex predator of the room. Whispers rippled through the crowd as I descended the stairs. Chloe, my assistant, walked a half step behind me, carrying a sleek digital tablet. I scanned the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns until I spotted my family. Marcus was holding court near the ice sculpture, a smug, relaxed smile plastered across his face. He looked like a man who believed he had successfully stolen millions of dollars and gotten away with it completely. Beside him stood Harper. She wore a stunning sapphire dress, but her posture was rigid. She gripped her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles were white. When her eyes met mine across the room, she gave a microscopic nod. She was terrified, but she knew exactly what would happen if she broke our agreement. I continued my slow, deliberate path through the ballroom. Guests parted for me, offering polite but cautious greetings. The Atlanta elite loved a scandal, and the rumors of a hostile takeover between me and my father had been circulating for weeks. Before I could reach the center of the room, the sharp clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal glass cut through the ambient noise. Elias stood on the raised stage at the front of the ballroom, stepping up to the polished acrylic podium. The room quieted down, turning their attention to the patriarch of the Wilson Empire. Elias adjusted his tuxedo jacket, projecting the image of a benevolent, deeply successful titan of industry. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Elias began, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are gathered to celebrate the enduring legacy of the Wilson family and our unwavering commitment to the future of Atlanta." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, crossing my arms, waiting for his move. I knew exactly what he was attempting to do. He was setting a trap in front of 300 witnesses. "As many of you know, the business landscape has been challenging lately." Elias continued, his tone shifting to one of practiced fatherly warmth. "There have been whispers of division within my family, rumors of corporate friction between myself and my daughter Nia." He paused dramatically, looking out over the crowd until his eyes locked directly onto me. The spotlight swung, illuminating me in the center of the room. Every head turned in my direction. "But family is stronger than any boardroom disagreement," Elias declared, placing a hand over his heart. "And tonight, I am beyond proud to announce that the Wilson family is completely united." Marcus joined his father on the stage, clapping his hands with an expression of pure, fabricated joy. Harper stayed on the floor, her face pale. "In a testament to her loyalty and her dedication to our shared legacy." Elias projected his voice to ensure the journalists at the back of the room caught every word. "My daughter Nia has officially returned to the fold. Just this morning, she voluntarily transferred the entirety of her offshore trust holdings, a sum of $50 million, directly into the Wilson corporate treasury. She has generously donated her personal wealth to consolidate our assets and secure our philanthropic ventures for the next century." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom, immediately followed by thunderous applause. The cameras flashed blindly. I stared at the stage, maintaining a perfectly serene expression while processing the sheer audacity of his lie. Elias and Marcus had forged my signature to steal those funds just 24 hours ago. Now they were standing in front of the entire Atlanta high society, framing their federal crime as my voluntary loving sacrifice. They were attempting to force me into a corner. If I threw a tantrum and denied it now, I would look exactly like the unstable, erratic woman they planned to paint me as in court. I would look like a daughter having a public meltdown, retracting a charitable gift in front of the city's most powerful people. They thought they had checkmated me. They thought the social pressure of this gala would force me to smile, nod, and accept the theft to save face. Marcus looked down at me from the stage, a sickeningly victorious grin stretching across his face. He actually mouthed the words, "Thank you, sis." I did not scream. I did not storm out. I uncrossed my arms, offered a brilliant, dazzling smile, and began walking directly toward the stage. The applause intensified as the crowd assumed I was going up to embrace my father. Elias looked momentarily panicked, clearly not expecting me to take the spotlight, but he quickly recovered, stepping back and extending his arm to welcome me up the stairs. I glided up the steps, my emerald gown trailing behind me. I stopped right in front of Elias. He leaned in close, his smile fixed for the cameras, and hissed a warning into my ear. "Play along, Naya, or I swear I will have you committed to a psychiatric ward by tomorrow morning." I ignored him completely. I stepped up to the acrylic podium, grasping the edges with both hands, and leaned into the microphone. The ballroom fell utterly silent, waiting for the prodigal daughter to confirm her surrender. "Thank you, Father," I said, my voice smooth, resonant, and entirely composed. "It is truly remarkable to stand here tonight and witness the depths of your dedication to the Wilson family legacy. You have always taught me that actions speak louder than words, and that true business acumen requires complete transparency." Elias nodded, looking relieved. He thought I was submitting. He thought I had accepted my defeat. $50 million is indeed a massive sum of money. I continued, my gaze sweeping across the faces of the wealthy investors, the politicians, and the journalists. And a transfer of that magnitude requires a very specific, very rigorous level of oversight. My father and my brother Marcus have worked tirelessly over the past 24 hours to execute this transaction. Their methods were absolutely unforgettable. I turned my head slightly, looking at Marcus. His victorious grin faltered just a fraction of an inch. A tiny bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. In fact, their dedication was so profound, I feel it would be a disservice not to share exactly how they managed to secure this historic financial consolidation. I said, my tone turning dangerously sweet. Transparency is, after all, the foundation of any good charity. Elias took a sudden step forward, his hand reaching out as if to grab my arm. "Nia, that is enough. The guests do not need to be bored with the administrative logistics." "Oh, I assure you, Father, they will not be bored," I replied, turning back to the microphone. I lifted my hand and snapped my fingers once, pointing directly at Chloe, who was standing by the primary audio-visual control desk at the back of the room. "Chloe," I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the ballroom, "play the video." The three massive projection screens suspended above the stage, previously displaying heartwarming montages of underprivileged children the foundation claimed to help, suddenly went entirely black. For a fraction of a second, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis was plunged into an eerie, expectant hush. Then the crisp, high-definition feed from Elias's own executive boardroom illuminated the dark room, casting a harsh, unforgiving light over the sea of couture gowns and tailored tuxedos. The state-of-the-art sound system, calibrated for symphony orchestras and operatic performances, projected Marcus's panicked, desperate voice with crystal clarity. "We need a cash injection immediately, Dad. If we cannot show the board some kind of liquid capital by tomorrow morning, they will vote to remove you." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Hundreds of champagne flutes halted halfway to their owners' lips. Down on the floor, I watched Marcus physically recoil, his face draining of all color until he looked like a wax mannequin. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into a waiter and sending a tray of crystal glasses crashing to the marble floor. The shattering glass underscored the digital voice echoing from the speakers. On the screens, the video feed zoomed in with ruthless precision. The entire high society of Atlanta watched in stunned fascination as Marcus pulled the emergency asset transfer authorization form from his briefcase. They watched Elias, the supposed pillar of Southern business integrity, explicitly endorse the crime. "She is an uneducated girl playing a man's game," Marcus sneered from the towering screens, his digitized voice dripping with venom. "She will never notice a quiet transfer in an account she forgot about 10 years ago. A dropout cannot outsmart a boardroom full of real executives." The camera captured the exact, undeniable moment Marcus forged my signature on the bottom line. It showed him uploading the fraudulent document to the offshore banking portal. It captured his triumphant, arrogant laugh when the $12 million transfer was approved. The video did not just expose a lie, it broadcast a federal crime in real time. When the screens abruptly cut to black, the silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a catastrophic storm. The city's elite, the politicians who had endorsed Elias, the investors who had just written six-figure checks to a foundation built on fraud, were entirely paralyzed. Then the storm broke. It started as a low, furious murmur and instantly erupted into a deafening roar of outrage. The carefully curated illusion of the Wilson family legacy shattered completely. Men and women in formal wear abandoned all pretense of high society decorum. Investors who had been lured into Elias's real estate funds surged forward, their faces twisted in fury. They swarmed the stage, shouting demands, cursing Elias and calling for their lawyers. Elias rushed to the podium, aggressively elbowing me aside in a desperate bid to reach the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," he bellowed, his face red with panic. "This is a fabrication, a deep fake created by a disgruntled, unstable daughter to extort her own family." He tapped the microphone frantically, but no sound amplified through the room. I glanced back at Chloe, who gave me a tight, satisfied smile. She had cut the audio feed to the podium the second the video ended. Elias was shouting into dead air, looking increasingly frantic, waving his arms at a crowd that was rapidly turning into an angry mob. Marcus was trying to flee. He shoved his way toward the service exit, but his path was blocked by three furious members of his own corporate board. They cornered him against a pillar, demanding answers about the missing capital. Harper stood frozen near the ice sculpture, her eyes locked on me. I gave her a brief, approving nod. She had played her part perfectly by doing exactly nothing. Suddenly, a sharp, commanding voice pierced through the chaos near the stage stairs. "Get out of my way." Vivian, my mother, pushed forcefully past a group of stunned senators. She was draped in heavy diamonds and wore a scarlet evening gown that matched the fury radiating from her eyes. For my entire life, Vivian had been the chief architect of the family facade. She was obsessed with appearances, social standing, and protecting her golden son Marcus at all costs. I was the inconvenient, rebellious daughter she could never quite mold into a compliant society wife. Vivian marched up the stairs, her heels clicking aggressively against the wood. She did not look at the angry investors. She did not look at her husband, who was currently being cornered by two federal judges demanding an explanation. Her eyes were fixed entirely on me. She closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. Before I could say a word, Vivian raised her right hand and slapped me squarely across the face. The crack of her palm against my cheek was sharp and loud, cutting through the immediate shouting around the stage. My head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. A sudden stinging heat bloomed across my skin. The people standing closest to the stage gasped, stepping back in shock. Vivian stood breathing heavily, her chest heaving, her manicured hand still raised. "You ungrateful, vicious little traitor," she hissed, her voice vibrating with pure, unfiltered hatred. "You are no daughter of mine. You are destroying your own blood. You come into our event, you humiliate your father, and you try to ruin your brother with fabricated garbage. You are a monster." I slowly turned my head back to face her. I did not raise a hand to touch my stinging cheek. I could taste the faint metallic tang of copper in my mouth, where my teeth had caught the inside of my lip. I looked at the woman who had brought me into the world, studying the absolute disgust etched into her perfectly lifted face. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that made Vivian instinctively take a half step backward. "You hit me the exact same way when I was 16. I said, my voice dangerously calm, easily carrying over the surrounding noise. Do you remember that mother I found the stolen test papers Marcus used to cheat on his final exams? I tried to show them to you and you slapped me across the face and threw them in the fireplace. You told me I was jealous of his intellect. You have always protected the parasite at the expense of the host. Vivian's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine panic crossing her face, as several nearby reporters scribbled furiously on their notepads. You are insane, she stammered, trying to regain her authoritative posture. You need psychiatric help, Nia. You are having a complete mental breakdown in front of all these people. I am perfectly sane, I replied, stepping closer to her. That is what terrifies you. For 34 years, you and Elias controlled the narrative. You painted Marcus as the brilliant heir and me as the unstable disappointment. But the video playing on those screens was not a deep fake, Vivian. It was raw, unedited security footage. Your brilliant heir just committed wire fraud and forgery, and your husband helped him do it. Elias had finally managed to push his way past the angry investors and grabbed Vivian's arm, pulling her back. He glared at me, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. You think this proves anything? You think a stolen security video changes the fact that I am filing for a conservatorship tomorrow? I will tell the judge you manipulated the footage. I will tell the judge this entire stunt proves you are a danger to yourself and this family. You will not see a single dime of your grandfather's trust. I looked at my father, genuinely marveling at his boundless delusion. He was standing in the ruins of his reputation, surrounded by people who were actively dialing the authorities, and he still believed he held the power. I stepped back to the podium. Chloe hit a switch on her tablet, instantly restoring power to the microphone. The sharp feedback squeal silenced the immediate area, drawing the attention of the entire ballroom back to me. Let me make this perfectly clear to every investor, board member, and journalist in this room, I announced, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The $50 million transfer my father just bragged about was not a philanthropic donation. It was a desperate illegal theft, executed by a bankrupt company trying to artificially inflate its liquidity. The Wilson family empire is a mirage built on debt and deceit. I turned to look directly at Elias, Marcus, and Vivian. They stood huddled together on the stage, looking like a besieged kingdom about to fall. If you think exposing a petty $12 million theft is a betrayal, you lack imagination, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, chilling register. The real betrayal has not even begun. You wanted a war for my grandfather's trust. You wanted to declare me incompetent. I gladly accept the challenge. I will see you all in Fulton County Superior Court on Monday morning. Bring your lawyers. You are going to need every single one of them. I did not wait for a response. I turned my back on my family and walked down the stage stairs. The crowd of stunned socialites and furious investors parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, clear path to the exit. Chloe fell into step right beside me, her tablet tucked neatly under her arm. As I walked through the gilded double doors and out into the cool Atlanta night, leaving the chaos and the shouting behind me, I wiped a single drop of blood from the corner of my mouth. The slap had stung, but the victory was sweet. Monday morning was going to be a masterpiece. The air conditioning inside the Wilson corporate headquarters had been shut off for the weekend, turning the 32nd floor into a suffocating, airless vault. The silence of the abandoned office was violently broken by the relentless mechanical grinding of industrial paper shredders. Marcus stood in the center of the room, his expensive tuxedo jacket discarded on the floor, his silk tie hanging loosely around his neck. His hands shook uncontrollably as he shoved thick stacks of manila folders into the steel teeth of the machine. The document's original wire transfer authorizations, physical ledgers from the Savannah Futures Initiative, and printed offshore account statements were instantly chewed into meaningless white confetti. Sterling Vance, Elias's lead attorney, and the family's designated attack dog, stood by the glass wall barking orders into his cell phone. Vance was a ruthless, pragmatic man who had built a lucrative career burying the sins of Atlanta's elite. Tonight, however, the pristine sheen of his confidence had completely evaporated. Wipe the primary servers and then physically destroy the backup drives, Vance shouted into his phone, his face a mask of furious concentration. I do not care if it takes all night. Take a hammer to the hard drives, magnetize them, Burn them in the parking deck if you have to. If a federal auditor walks into this building on Monday morning and finds a single kilobyte of data connecting Marcus to that Cayman account, I will personally see to it that you are implicated as an accessory. Vance ended the call and turned to Marcus, his eyes narrowed with absolute disgust. Feed it faster. Marcus Vance ordered, pacing the length of the room. We have exactly 36 hours before the courts open. Nia played a dangerous game tonight, but she showed her hand too early. Without the physical paper trail, that video she played at the gala is just a digital file. We will claim it is a deepfake. We will bring in our own digital forensics experts to testify that the audio was artificially generated and the faces were mapped onto actors. But that defense only works if the actual financial records no longer exist. Marcus dragged a shaking hand across his sweating forehead, grabbing another stack of charity ledgers. She tricked us, Sterling. She intentionally disabled the security protocols on that account, so we would make the transfer. She wanted us to do it on camera. She did not trick you. You walked directly into a painfully obvious trap because you are arrogant and intellectually lazy. Vance snapped, offering zero comfort. You underestimated a woman who has spent the last decade liquidating distressed assets. She guts bleeding companies for a living, and you thought you could outsmart her with a forged signature. Now shut your mouth and keep shredding. I need every trace of your charity fraud turned to dust before sunrise. While Marcus and Vance frantically attempted to erase their digital and physical footprints, Elias Wilson was executing a much more sophisticated, far darker strategy. Deep in the heart of Buckhead, hidden away in a windowless, oak-paneled private room at the Capital City Club, Elias sat across a small mahogany table from the Honorable Judge Robert Thornton. The air in the room was thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive cigars. Judge Thornton was a man who appreciated the finer things in life, a man whose judicial salary rarely covered his expansive tastes in vintage bourbon and private country club memberships. He was also the exact judge assigned to preside over the emergency conservatorship hearing on Monday morning. Elias poured a generous measure of 20-year-old Macallan into a crystal tumbler and slid it across the polished wood table. It is a tragedy, Robert Elias said, his voice dropping into a register of profound manufactured sorrow, to watch your own flesh and blood lose her grip on reality. Nia has always been fiercely independent, but lately her behavior has become entirely unhinged. She is suffering from severe corporate burnout, manifesting as aggressive paranoia. Judge Thornton took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the amber liquid burn down his throat before resting the glass on the table. The stunt she pulled at your gala tonight was highly publicized, Elias. The video she broadcast is already circulating on every local news outlet. There are allegations of wire fraud. Fabricated nonsense. Elias interrupted smoothly, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. It is a desperate, vindictive attempt to destroy the family business because she feels excluded. She hired a team of rogue developers to create a synthetic video. It is a terrifying reality of modern technology, Robert. Anyone can put words into another man's mouth. I am stepping in to take conservatorship of her estate, simply to protect her from herself. She needs intensive psychiatric care, not access to a $50 million trust fund. Judge Thornton sighed, tapping his thick fingers against the crystal glass. If she submits that video into evidence on Monday, I am legally obligated to review it. The media scrutiny surrounding this hearing is going to be intense. Elias reached inside the breast pocket of his tuxedo and extracted a sleek, unbranded black envelope. He placed it gently on the table and slid it precisely to the center, leaving it sitting exactly halfway between them. The media only knows what the court validates, Elias said, his voice remarkably calm. We need a judge who understands the sanctity of the family institution. We need someone who can see past the modern erratic hysteria of a troubled woman and uphold the traditional pillars of this community. Inside that envelope are the routing numbers to an offshore account in the Bahamas. It is a completely untraceable anonymous holding corporation. Thornton stared at the black envelope. The room was absolutely silent. Consider it a substantial contribution to your upcoming re-election campaign, Elias continued softly, or perhaps a well-deserved enhancement to your retirement security. Whatever you choose to call it, the funds are immediately available. All I require is a guarantee that on Monday morning you will rule the digital evidence entirely inadmissible due to unverified manipulation. I need you to grant the conservatorship petition swiftly and decisively, placing Nia's assets under my direct control for her own protection. Judge Thornton looked at Elias, then looked back down at the envelope. Slowly, deliberately, the judge reached out his hand, picked up the envelope, and slid it into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Mental health crises within prominent families are indeed a tragedy. Elias Thornton said, his voice entirely devoid of shame. I will review the petition on Monday morning. Rest assured I have zero tolerance for manipulated digital evidence in my courtroom. Elias leaned back in his chair, a slow, deeply satisfied smile spreading across his face. He raised his glass of bourbon. The system was functioning exactly as it was designed to function. Justice was not blind. It was simply expensive, and Elias Wilson was more than willing to pay the price. Miles away from the suffocating corporate office and the smoke-filled back room of the country club, my office was a sanctuary of cool, dark serenity. I sat behind my mahogany desk, the expansive glass windows behind me framing the glittering electric skyline of Atlanta. The city looked peaceful from this height, completely disconnected from the frantic, desperate scrambling happening on the ground below. Chloe stood by the espresso machine pouring 2 cups of dark roast coffee. The only illumination in the room came from the massive dual monitors glowing on my desk. I watched a series of digital progress bars filling up on the screen, verifying the completion of massive data transfers. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee Chloe handed me, enjoying the absolute profound quiet of the night. Vance ordered the IT department to physically destroy the servers, Chloe noted, glancing at the security feed running on a secondary screen. Marcus just finished shredding the physical ledgers from the Savannah charity. They are burning the hard drives in the loading dock right now. I smiled, a sharp, genuine expression of amusement. Cornered rats make terrible decisions, Chloe. They are so blinded by their own panic that they completely lack basic strategic foresight. They actually believe destroying the local hardware will save them. I tapped my keyboard, bringing up an intricate, highly organized digital dossier. Let them burn the drives, I said softly. It does not matter. My forensic accounting team cloned their entire server infrastructure 3 weeks ago. We have every single email Marcus sent to his offshore broker. We have the original unadulterated ledgers from the charity showing the exact dates Harper skimmed the scholarship funds. We even have the deleted internal memos where Vance advised them on how to bypass federal auditing software. Chloe leaned over my shoulder, looking at the glowing screen. And Elias? I opened a separate, highly encrypted file. I had a private investigator tailing Elias the moment he requested Judge Thornton for the docket. Elias thinks he is untraceable, but his arrogance makes him incredibly predictable. He just transferred $3 million into a Bahamian shell corporation registered to Thornton's brother-in-law. The transaction cleared 10 minutes ago. I leaned back in my chair, interlacing my fingers. Elias believes he just bought the umpire. He thinks Monday morning is going to be a swift, quiet execution in a civil courtroom. He thinks the judge will throw out the video, grant the conservatorship, and lock me away in a golden cage while they drain my grandfather's trust to save their failing empire. I reached out and grasped my computer mouse. I opened a highly secure encrypted email client. This was no longer a family dispute over a trust fund. This was no longer a civil matter to be debated in front of a corrupted local judge. My family had crossed the threshold from toxic manipulation into a massive multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. They had weaponized their wealth to subvert the law, and now the law was going to crush them. I typed the destination address into the recipient line. I was not sending this to a local attorney or a civil court clerk. I was sending this directly to the special agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division in Atlanta. I attached the cloned server data. I attached the high-definition video and audio files from the boardroom. I attached the transaction logs detailing Harper's charity fraud, Marcus's cryptocurrency embezzlement, and Elias's judicial bribery. I looked at the subject line. Wilson Corporate Holdings. Comprehensive evidence of wire fraud, charity embezzlement, and judicial bribery. They wanted to play God, I whispered to the empty, quiet room. Let us see how they handle the devil. I pressed my finger down on the mouse and clicked send. The heavy mahogany doors of Fulton County Superior Court Room 4B felt like the gates to a fortress. Monday morning had arrived with a suffocating humid heat that clung to the city, but inside the courthouse the air conditioning was sharp and sterile. I walked down the marble corridor, the steady click of my heels echoing off the high ceilings. I carried a single black leather briefcase. I walked entirely alone. Inside the courtroom, the contrast was immediate and glaring. The plaintiff's table looked like a corporate war room. Elias and Marcus sat at the center, flanked by Sterling Vance and four other junior partners from Vance's firm. They wore bespoke navy and charcoal suits, their briefcases open, documents meticulously arranged into neat, intimidating stacks. They projected an impenetrable wall of wealth, influence, and legal aggression. Marcus was the first to spot me walking down the aisle. He leaned back in his heavy wooden chair, a wide, incredulous grin splitting his face. He actually laughed aloud, a sharp barking sound that caused a few court clerks to look up from their desks in surprise. "Are you kidding me?" Marcus sneered, standing up and buttoning his tailored jacket as he stepped out from behind his table. He blocked the aisle, forcing me to stop. "You actually showed up alone. Where is your legal team, Nia? Did you finally run out of funds to pay your retainer? Or did every lawyer in Atlanta just realize you are a complete lost cause?" I looked at him, noting the faint dark circles under his eyes. It was the physical evidence of his frantic, sleepless weekends spent destroying documents and burning hard drives. He was overcompensating, trying to project a victory he had not yet secured. He needed me to feel small so he could feel safe. "I do not need a team of lawyers to defend myself against a fabricated petition, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly level. "And I certainly do not need representation to watch you dig your own grave." Elias placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, pulling him back slightly. Elias played the part of the weary, heartbroken father to absolute perfection. He wore a solemn, pained expression, but his eyes danced with malicious triumph. He believed he held all the cards. He believed the check he handed over in that dark country club room had guaranteed his reign. "Nia, this does not have to be a public spectacle," Elias said, pitching his voice just loud enough for the gallery of reporters sitting in the back row to hear. "It is breaking your mother's heart to see you like this. You are unrepresented. You are clearly not in your right mind. If you simply concede to the conservatorship right now, I will ensure the transition is quiet and dignified. You will get the help you so desperately need." I glanced past him to the front row of the gallery. Vivian sat perfectly straight, clutching a vintage Chanel handbag on her lap. She wore a severe black dress and her signature pearls. She refused to make eye contact with me, her jaw locked in tight, silent condemnation. She was entirely ready to watch her daughter be stripped of all autonomy, her assets seized, and her voice silenced, so long as it protected her lavish lifestyle and her golden son. "Save the performance for the cameras," Elias, I replied, stepping around them to reach the defendant's table. "We both know exactly what you are trying to do, and we both know you have spent the entire weekend trying to guarantee the outcome of this hearing." Sterling Vance leaned across the plaintiff's table, resting his knuckles on the polished wood. He looked at me the way a scientist examines a dying insect on a pin. "Ms. Wilson, speaking strictly as an officer of the court, your decision to appear pro se in a conservatorship hearing involving assets of this magnitude is highly prejudicial to your own case. It demonstrates a profound lack of judgment. The judge will absolutely take note of your erratic behavior. You are making my job incredibly easy." I placed my briefcase on the empty table and took my seat. The sheer arrogance radiating from their side of the room was staggering. They were completely convinced they had won. They believed their shredded documents and their offshore bribes had secured the perimeter. They looked at me as an unarmed opponent walking blindly into a firing squad. They had no idea that they were the ones standing on the trapdoor. The courtroom was filling up quickly. Journalists crowded the back benches, their pens poised and laptops open. This was the highest-profile family dispute Atlanta had seen in a decade. The patriarch of the Wilson Empire taking legal control of his rebellious, wealthy daughter. It was perfect tabloid fodder, a modern tragedy of high society breakdown. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. the heavy silence broken only by the rustling of papers and whispered conversations from the opposing counsel. I sat in my chair, my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me. I did not open my briefcase. I did not shuffle through defensive files or legal precedents. I simply waited. The calm I projected seemed to unnerve Marcus. I could see him shifting his weight in his periphery, shooting irritated glances at my empty table. He expected me to be frantic, disorganized, and terrified. My absolute stillness was a variable he could not compute. The heavy wooden door behind the bench swung open. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice booming across the room and demanding instant compliance. All rise. The Honorable Judge, Robert Thornton, presiding. The courtroom stood in unison. I watched closely as Judge Thornton took his seat at the elevated bench. He was a large man with a red face and a stern, uncompromising demeanor. He adjusted his black robe and arranged his files with practiced authority. Before he looked down at his docket, his eyes flicked toward Elias. It was a fraction of a second, a minuscule, barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement. Elias smiled, a microscopic tightening of his lips in return. The transaction was confirmed. The fix was officially in. Elias had bought his executioner, and now he was waiting for the blade to fall. Judge Thornton picked up his heavy wooden gavel. He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on my solitary figure at the defendant's table before looking over at the army of lawyers representing my father. He struck the sounding block with a sharp, definitive crack that echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. Court is now in session, Thornton announced, his voice flat and authoritative. We are here today to hear the emergency petition for conservatorship in the matter of Nia Wilson. Let us open the file. The court clerk stepped forward, carrying the thin manila envelope I had submitted to the registry a mere 10 minutes before the doors opened. She handed it up to the bench. Judge Thornton accepted it with a dismissive wave of his hand. He adjusted his reading glasses, sliced the top open with a silver letter opener, and slid the contents onto his polished mahogany desk. He expected a frantic, poorly drafted defense from a desperate woman. He expected medical records or tearful pleas of sanity. Instead, he found a single crisp sheet of paper. I sat perfectly still, watching his eyes dart across the top line of text. The physical transformation of the Honorable Robert Thornton was immediate and catastrophic. The heavy flushed jowls that usually projected absolute authority suddenly sagged. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving behind a sickening ashen gray. His thick fingers gripping the edges of the paper began to tremble. The faint, sharp rustling of the vibrating paper was the only sound in the cavernous courtroom. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The room had been buzzing with the quiet, predatory anticipation of a high-profile execution. Now it fell into a terrifyingly heavy silence. It was the suffocating vacuum of a bomb dropping in the split second before the shockwave obliterates everything, Marcus noticed. The arrogant, barking laughter from moments ago died in his throat. He shifted his weight in his heavy wooden chair, his eyes darting frantically between my serene posture and the judge's crumbling facade. A thick bead of sweat materialized at his temple, tracking slowly down the side of his face. He wiped his palms on his tailored trousers. He stopped smiling. He stopped breathing. Elias leaned forward, his manufactured mask of fatherly sorrow slipping to reveal raw, confused panic. He could not comprehend what was happening. He had paid $3 million to guarantee this moment. He had bought the umpire. The game was supposed to be rigged. Sterling Vance, sensing the sudden catastrophic shift in the room's gravity, sprang into action. He pushed his chair back violently, the wood scraping loudly against the marble floor. "Your Honor," Vance boomed, projecting his voice to regain control of the narrative. "The plaintiff strongly objects to the admission of any unverified document submitted pro se without prior discovery. We demand that document be stricken from the record immediately." Vance marched down the aisle toward the bench, extending his hand, demanding to see the weapon I had placed in the judge's hands. Judge Thornton did not speak. He did not issue a ruling on the objection. He simply turned the single sheet of paper around and pushed it across the bench toward the edge. Vance leaned over, adjusting his suit jacket, his eyes scanning the text. I watched the legendary attack dog of Atlanta's elite completely deflate. The color vanished from his sharp features. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Vance stumbled backward, his highly polished shoes slipping on the marble. He hit the edge of the plaintiff's table, his knees buckling, and dropped heavily into his chair like a man who had just been shot. I knew exactly what they were looking at. It was a certified time-stamped copy of a federal subpoena authorized directly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It explicitly cited the offshore Bahamian shell corporation registered to Thornton's brother-in-law. It detailed the exact routing numbers, the exact IP address, and the exact $3 million bribe Elias had transferred over the weekend. It was an undeniable, unassailable checkmate. It was the end of their lie. It was the end of their empire. It was the end of their freedom. Marcus leaned over the table, grabbing Vance by the shoulder, shaking him frantically. "What is it?" Marcus hissed, his voice cracking with pure terror. "What does it say, Sterling? Tell me what it says." Vance did not answer. He did not look at Marcus. He stared blankly straight ahead at the wood paneling, completely paralyzed by the realization that his career and his liberty were evaporating. Elias slammed his fist on the table, a loud, desperate crack that echoed through the silent gallery. Robert Elias shouted, dropping all formalities, addressing the judge directly. "What is the meaning of this? Proceed with the ruling." Judge Thornton slowly lowered his trembling hands to the desk. He looked out over the courtroom, his eyes completely bypassing Elias. He looked directly at me. There was no judicial authority left in his gaze, only raw, unfiltered terror. He reached for his wooden gavel. His hand shook so violently, he nearly dropped the heavy instrument. "Upon immediate review of the submitted evidence," Thornton croaked, his voice thin, reedy, and entirely stripped of its former power. He cleared his throat, desperate to steady himself, but failed completely. "This court finds the plaintiff's petition to be entirely without merit." Elias bolted upright, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. "Your Honor, I object. You cannot possibly rule based on a single unseen document. I demand a recess." Thornton struck the gavel with a frantic, uncoordinated blow before Elias could utter another word. "The emergency petition for the conservatorship of Nia Wilson is denied and dismissed with extreme prejudice," Thornton declared rapidly, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to escape the bench. "This court is adjourned." "Wait!" Elias screamed, lunging toward the bench, but Thornton was already retreating through the heavy door to his private chambers. The judge vanished, leaving his authority shattered on the floor behind him. The gallery exploded. Reporters scrambled over the wooden benches, shouting questions and snapping photographs. I remained standing at the defendant's table. I calmly unzipped my black leather briefcase and pulled out a thick-bound stack of legal documents, dropping them onto the polished wood with a heavy thud. Marcus stared at the papers as if they were venomous. "What did you do to him?" he choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the empty bench. "What did you give him?" "I did not need a defense attorney today, Marcus," I said, my voice projecting perfectly over the rising chaos of the courtroom. "Because you cannot be placed under a conservatorship by individuals who no longer possess any legal, civil, or financial standing." The document that just made Judge Thornton run for his life was not a medical evaluation or a defense brief. It was a federal asset freeze order. Elias froze, his hand still suspended in the air, from reaching toward the judge. "A freeze order on what grounds?" "On the grounds of severe premeditated wire fraud," I replied, staring directly into my brother's terrified eyes. "When you forged my signature on that offshore transfer on Friday night, you triggered an automatic federal alert. You did not just steal my money, Marcus. You attempted to defraud a federally insured international institution. You crossed state and international lines digitally, which makes it a massive federal crime, and that was just the appetizer." Sterling Vance groaned aloud, finally lifting his head from his hands. His face was a mask of pure defeat. He knew exactly what was coming next. "You see, Elias," I continued, turning my attention to my father, who was suddenly looking incredibly old and incredibly small. "When my firm Apex Holdings bought your toxic debt, there were specific covenants attached. Strict, uncompromising liquidity covenants. Your little stunt over the weekend violated every single one of them." Because you defaulted, and because you attempted to cover that default up with criminal fraud, a cross-collateralization clause was triggered exactly 3 days ago. Vivian pushed her way to the wooden railing that separated the gallery from the floor. Her flawless composure was completely gone. What does that mean, speak English, Nia? It means, mother, that I foreclosed. I smiled, the absolute satisfaction settling deep in my chest. As of Friday evening, Apex Holdings legally seized every remaining asset attached to Wilson Corporate. The downtown headquarters, the subsidiary companies, the offshore holding accounts, your vacation homes, your personal equity. All of it. I did not bring a lawyer today, because I am no longer a defendant fighting for my autonomy. I am your sole creditor and I now legally own 100% of your entire empire. Elias gasped for air, clutching his chest as he stumbled backward into his chair. The untouchable patriarch was finally broken. Before any of them could formulate a response or scream another insult, a loud, heavy thud echoed from the back of the room. The thick oak double doors of the courtroom were violently thrown open, slamming hard against the plaster walls. A dozen men and women in tactical windbreakers flooded into the center aisle. The bold yellow letters on their backs read FBI. The lead agent marched straight past the stunned reporters, his eyes locked entirely on Marcus and Elias, as he unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Marcus Wilson, you are under arrest, the lead agent announced, his voice slicing through the pandemonium. He grabbed Marcus by the shoulder, spinning him around and snapping the cold steel around his wrists. You are being charged with multiple federal counts of wire fraud, interstate embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus thrashed against the agent's grip, his perfectly tailored suit jacket bunching up around his neck. This is a mistake, he screamed, his voice cracking into a high pitch of absolute panic. I did not do anything. My father made me do it. Elias ordered the transfer. Before Elias could even process his golden boy, throwing him to the wolves, another figure stood up from the second row of the gallery. It was Harper. She stepped out into the aisle, smoothing the skirt of her designer dress. She did not look at Marcus with sympathy. She looked at him with profound disgust. Agent Harper said, clearly holding up a small silver flash drive. My family has been auditing the Savannah Futures Initiative all weekend. I have the unencrypted local drives Marcus thought he destroyed on Friday night. They contain the original ledgers proving he embezzled $4 million from my family's scholarship fund to cover his cryptocurrency losses. Marcus froze, his eyes widening in pure horror as he stared at his fiancée. Harper, what are you doing? He pleaded, tears streaming down his face, ruining his immaculate image. We are getting married. You cannot do this to me. I am not marrying a federal inmate, Marcus Harper replied coldly, dropping the drive into the agent's outstretched hand. I am cooperating with the authorities to reclaim my family's stolen assets. You are on your own. No, Marcus wailed as two agents dragged him down the center aisle. He fought like a terrified child, kicking his expensive shoes against the marble floor. Dad, do something. Sterling, file an injunction. Do not let them take me. His screams faded as the heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind him. Elias stood completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing silently as he watched his heir apparent being dragged away in chains. The realization of his total destruction hit him like a physical blow. The company was gone. The offshore accounts were frozen. The judge was compromised. His son was headed to federal prison. The magnificent, untouchable Wilson empire had been reduced to ash in less than 10 minutes. Elias let out a sharp, strangled gasp. His hands flew to his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt as his face turned a mottled, terrifying shade of purple. He stumbled sideways, knocking over a stack of useless legal files before his knees gave out. He collapsed heavily onto the hard marble floor, gasping for air, clutching his heart as his world went dark. Sterling Vance shouted for a medic, dropping to his knees beside his ruined client. The gallery erupted into absolute chaos as reporters shouted into their phones and clerks rushed forward. I picked up my black leather briefcase. I smoothed the lapels of my jacket. The air in the courtroom suddenly felt incredibly light and breathable. I walked down the center aisle, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the stone. I reached the spot where my father lay gasping on the floor, surrounded by panic. I did not stop. I did not slow my pace. I stepped smoothly over his outstretched hand, pushed through the heavy wooden doors, and walked out into the bright Atlanta morning without ever looking back. 2 days later, the oppressive Georgia heat had finally broken, leaving behind a crisp, clear morning. I stood at the end of the long cobblestone driveway of the Buckhead estate, watching a Fulton County sheriff press a bright yellow seizure notice flat against the massive wrought iron gates. The sprawling brick mansion, a monument to Elias Wilson's ego, and the site of my most painful childhood memories, was completely quiet. The heavy mahogany front doors swung open, breaking the silence. Vivian stumbled out onto the stone portico. She was entirely unrecognizable from the severe poised woman who had sat in the courtroom gallery just 48 hours prior. Her perfectly styled hair was flattened, her makeup was smeared, and she was clumsily dragging two medium-sized suitcases down the front steps. They contained the few personal garments the federal auditors had legally permitted her to pack. Everything else, the art, the jewelry, the vehicles, now belonged to Apex Holdings. She spotted me leaning against the hood of my car and immediately abandoned her luggage. She ran down the driveway, her expensive heels clicking erratically against the stone. "Nia, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking with a desperate, breathless panic. "You cannot actually do this to me. Where am I supposed to go?" "The banks froze all of my personal accounts this morning. Your father is hooked up to machines in the intensive care unit, and the FBI is holding Marcus without bail. I have absolutely nothing left. You have to let me stay in the house." I looked at her, feeling an absolute profound emptiness, where my anger used to live. For 30 years, Vivian had existed as a willing parasite attached to Elias's power. She had worshipped at the altar of his wealth and eagerly discarded anyone who threatened her comfort, including her own daughter. Seeing her reduced to a weeping, trembling shell exposed exactly how hollow her entire existence had always been. She had no identity outside of the money that had just been stripped away. "I am your mother, Nia," she cried, reaching out with a shaking hand to grab my arm. "Please, you have to show some mercy." I took a deliberate step backward, letting her hand grasp nothing but empty air. I looked up at the sprawling estate, then back down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like an unwelcome guest inside of it. "I recall a conversation we had 5 years ago," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any sympathy. "When Elias cut off my tuition and I begged you for a temporary loan to finish my degree. You looked at me with absolute disgust and told me to figure it out." Vivian froze, her breath hitching in her throat as the memory clearly hit her. "I believe your exact words were highly instructional." I continued, maintaining unwavering eye contact. "You are a single woman, Vivian. You have no burdens. You must know how to stand on your own 2 feet." The blood drained completely from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The realization that I was utterly immovable crashed over her. She slowly turned around, her shoulders slumped in total defeat, and walked back to retrieve her 2 suitcases. I watched in absolute silence as she dragged her luggage down the long, unforgiving driveway, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she walked out through the gates and vanished onto the street. The memory of Vivian, fading into the distance, dissolves, replaced by the quiet, unshakable peace of my present reality. The oppressive weight of the Buckhead estate vanishes entirely. I am back in my own sanctuary. I am seated comfortably in the deep velvet armchair of my downtown penthouse. The soft hum of the city vibrates through the thick glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows. I raise a porcelain cup of steaming hot tea to my lips. The soothing heat radiates through my hands, grounding me in the life I built with my own 2 hands. The camera dollies in, creeping steadily closer, narrowing the frame until the luxurious room behind me blurs out of focus. I slowly lower the teacup, letting it rest on the saucer. I look directly into the lens-locking eyes with anyone who has ever been made to feel small in their own home. For 30 years, I was force-fed the lie that family is an unbreakable contract. I was conditioned to believe that loyalty meant setting myself on fire just to keep my relatives warm. Society constantly demands that we forgive our parents, our siblings, our blood simply because we share a genetic sequence. We are taught from childhood that walking away from your family is the ultimate act of cruelty. I am here to tell you that is a manipulation. Severing ties with toxic bloodlines is not an act of cruelty. It is the purest, most necessary form of self-preservation. When people actively participate in your emotional and financial destruction, when they treat your existence as a liability and your pain as a minor inconvenience, you owe them absolutely nothing. Toxic family members bank on your ingrained guilt. They weaponize your compassion. Elias, Vivian, and Marcus constructed their entire legacy on the arrogant assumption that I would always fold, that I would eternally accept my designated place at the very bottom of their hierarchy. They made a fatal miscalculation. They confused my strategic silence for weakness. They confused my careful patience for submission. I did not destroy the Wilson family. I merely handed them the exact same rope they spent decades using to tie me down, and I watched them weave their own noose. Reclaiming my autonomy required amputating the diseased parts of my past. It was a painful extraction, but the only alternative was letting their infection kill my spirit. I chose to live. I stand up from the armchair, leaving the delicate teacup resting on the marble coffee table. I walk slowly, purposefully toward the glass doors leading out to the terrace. The camera follows, gliding smoothly behind me as I push the heavy glass doors open. The cool evening wind immediately washes over my face. The frame shifts, panning slowly past my shoulder to reveal the sweeping, glittering expanse of the Atlanta skyline at night. Millions of bright lights pulse in the darkness below, representing power, wealth, and relentless ambition. It is a city that respects only those who take back what belongs to them. I step up to the edge of the balcony. I rest my hands on the smooth glass railing, looking down at the vast empire I conquered, the empire I now own completely. They say blood is a sacred bond that cannot be broken. But the truth is, blood only makes the wound redder. True power does not lie in the last name you were born with. Power lies in your ability to put a price tag on that name. The camera stops its movement. The sparkling city lights hold steady for one final heartbeat. The screen cuts sharply to black.